And I'm delighted to say that Brendan O'Neill, the author of the book, joins me right now. Brendan, thanks for coming onto the show. I want to start by congratulating you on the book. It's fantastic. And I want to ask you, you talk in the book about how we in the West failed a moral test. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think 7th of October, primarily it was a grotesque pogrom. It was the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And that's what we should remember tomorrow on the first anniversary. We should remember that this was the worst act of racist violence of modern times. That's the thing that we need to focus on. But I also think that side by side with that, it posed a test to the Western world. You know, Hamas, alongside its grenades, it also laid down a gauntlet. It essentially dared us to be decisive. It dared us to show our principles, and it dared us to stand with the Jewish state against this army of anti-Semites. And we failed. We refused to do it, and we failed to do it. And across the West, in the academy, on university campuses, on the streets, in left-wing political circles, many people actually took the side of the pogromists rather than the pogromists' victims. And I think it really raised to the surface a lot of the moral rot in our societies, and it really demonstrated how serious our crisis of civilization has become.
And can I ask you, you also describe in the book, you say that Israel, you describe it as the most hated state. Do you think there's a way for people to criticise the Israeli government without slipping into anti-Semitism? Because what I've seen from a lot of people who attempt to do so actually do slip over, and it seems to be that's very common.
Yeah, people say it's not racist to criticize Israel. Of course it's not racist to criticize Israel. If you go to Israel and you don't like the food, or you think it's too hot, or you hate the government, that's fine. That's how we feel about lots of countries. But we're not talking about criticism of Israel. What we've seen over the past year is boiling, irrational hatred for Israel, dreams of Israel's destruction, open chants on the streets dreaming that Israel will one day be erased from the map of the earth, a real venomous hostility, one that crosses the line so far from criticism, rational political criticism, into something far darker, far more elemental, far more guttural. So the point I always make is criticize Israel as much as you want, but what we have on our streets and on our campuses and in many of our newspapers right now is this myopic focus on the Jewish state as the most evil state, and that makes me feel very suspicious.
Can I ask you why you think people who self-identify as left, I mean, not all people, of course, but a significant proportion, have a real blind spot when it comes to anti-Semitism? They seem to say that they're completely anti-racist in all circumstances, but here they are supporting Hamas, Iran, groups that openly state their intention to eradicate Jews, not just Israel, Jews.
It's astonishing. You know, tomorrow will be the first anniversary of the worst act of racist violence of modern times. And I can guarantee you that self-styled anti-racists and self-styled anti-fascists won't say anything. They will not put up a black square on their Instagram page. They will not have any candlelit vigils. They will not shed a single tear because they don't see Jews as being as deserving of their progressive sympathy as other minority groups. It's as simple as that. And in fact, over the past year, it's got even worse. They see Jews as deserving of hostility, as deserving of contempt, as deserving of opprobrium. And I think it's really down to the politics of identity, because when you have this politics that actually sorts people into racial boxes and which accords moral worth depending on skin color. So if you're white, you're privileged. If you're brown, you're oppressed. And they see everything through that narrow prism. And that's how they read the Israeli conflict. So they just see Israel as a white supremacist state, a white privileged state, deserving of nothing but contempt. And then they translate that onto Jews more broadly. So the greatest losers from the politics of identity right now, alongside women, of course, is Jewish people. And that's something we need to get to grips with.
One of the most astonishing things was that after the pogrom and the incidents of sexual assault, there were many mainstream commentators denying that there was sufficient evidence. And these are the same commentators that were part of the Me Too movement, who had supported the idea that we must believe all women. And you make a very good point in your book. You say that that phrase, believe all women, has now changed into believe fascists.
Absolutely. I had a bit of an issue, actually, with the Me Too cry, believe all women, not because I think we should disbelieve women, but because I think innocent until proven guilty is an important principle and we need to go through due process, et cetera, et cetera. But what was so striking was the way in which that slogan absolutely evaporated on 8th of October 2023. They stopped saying it. And in fact, they said, we don't believe these women. We don't believe there was sexual assault and rape in Israel on 7th of October. And they basically said, we believe Hamas, because Hamas issued really fervent denials that it carried out any such attacks against all the evidence that we have showing that they did. And so essentially, these people have gone from saying believe women to believe Hamas, believe terrorists, believe fascists. And that turnaround, I think, really demonstrates the paucity of modern virtue signaling feminism, but more broadly, the absolute lack of principle on the so-called progressive left when they can ditch their slogans so swiftly when it no longer suits them.
And finally, Brendan, some of the quotations that you provide in the book are quite astonishing, of figures who are celebrated by the left. People like Judith Butler, a celebrated gender philosopher, describing Hamas as progressive. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn described Hamas as his friends. What can the left do about this when their figureheads seem to be so intent on supporting, well, let's put it frankly, terrorists?
You know, the left is quite lost at the moment, and I feel sad about that as someone who originally comes from the left. I used to think the left was a pro-freedom, pro-enlightenment, pro-democracy movement, and it was once upon a time, but it has changed dramatically. It now takes the side of anti-enlightenment against enlightenment, and I think the commonality, people always say, how can we have queers for Palestine and all these gender fluid idiots supporting a movement that would throw them off the roof of a building given half a chance? It's a good question. I think the commonality between the progressive left and Hamas and Hezbollah is that both of them have a burning hostility to the West, to modernity, to reason, and increasingly to the Jewish people. So there is this creepy commonality between these two movements in the West and the East, and the left needs to get its house in order before it really loses the plot.
Well, Brendan, the book is absolutely brilliant. It's called After the Pogrom. It's available now. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.